We are so fortunate in college football to have a regular season where we get to have two top three undefeated matchups. Already having Tennessee and Georgia, Tennessee suffering their second loss in a blowout loss against South Carolina this past weekend. Georgia escaping Kentucky. Wasn't really escaping per se, but they only won by 10 on the road against Kentucky. I kind of expected more from them in that game. Ohio State and Michigan, of course, playing very similarly to Georgia, especially Ohio State. They controlled the game. They were never in a position where it was time to fully hit the panic button, but they played very close for comfort, Ohio State did on the road versus Maryland. And then there was the Michigan game, which, as a Michigan fan myself, was time to press the panic button. All year, Michigan never had less than a 50, 51, 52% chance to win a game according to the win probability graph. That ended against Illinois, who went up 17-10 at one point in the game. Michigan had to kick 3 field goals in the fourth quarter to win. But Michigan and Ohio State and Georgia all remained unscathed, along with TCU, who, like Michigan, had to have a game-winning field goal to win the game. They won at 29-28 on the road against Blake Shapen, I think, and Baylor. But here we are. Michigan is going to travel to Columbus for the first time since 2018, and Ohio State is going to have a chance to beat Michigan for the first time since 2019. There's a lot of stake in this matchup. There's a lot at stake, pardon me. If Michigan wins this game, they will have had their most successful, by win total, regular season in school history. Their most successful regular season by win total was in 1997 when they won 11 games. Because in 1997, you only had 11, not 12 regular season games. If Michigan goes into Columbus and wins, they'll get 12. They will have their third 12-win season, which includes 2021, since 1997, which was the only other 12-win season since then. And if they win in Columbus, they'll have their second 12-win season since 2000. Jim Harbaugh then having, or owning, rather, the only 12-win seasons in Michigan football history in the 21st century. Michigan would have a chance to go to the Big Ten championship game. Well, they would go to the Big Ten championship game at 12-0. Most likely win that. They'd have a chance to go 13-0 for the first time in school history and go on and do bigger and better things in the college football playoff. For Ohio State, they would rectify last year's loss against Michigan. They themselves would have a chance to be 13-0 for the second time in Ryan Day's tenure, which just honestly speaks to how good of a coach he is. He took over Urban Meyer's program, and in my opinion, he upgraded it. Now, Urban still has a national title that Ryan Day does not, but what Ryan Day's program looks like right now compared to what Urban Meyer's looked like for most of the Urban Meyer tenure is certainly more impressive. You have better offense by a mile. Defense is, I'd say, a little worse overall, but pretty similar. You still have NFL players or potential NFL players at basically every position. For Ohio State, it would be huge to win this game at home, get the program back on track, and let me tell you something. Georgia overall is probably the better team than Ohio State, but looking at matchups, like just matchup-wise, I want to let you in on a little secret here. Matchup-wise, I don't think anyone in Georgia's secondary can cover Ohio State's wide receivers. And I thought this was the case last year. Georgia was last year's national champions, and I think a healthy OSU last year would have beaten that team purely due to matchups, because Georgia's secondary last year, they couldn't cover a good wide receiver duo in John Mechie and Jamison Williams. Now imagine them trying to cover Jackson Smith-Njigba, Chris Olave, and Garrett Wilson. Now this year, imagine them trying to cover Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming, Marvin Harrison, and Jackson Smith-Njigba would probably be healthy and warmed up and schemed into everything by the playoff game. So this team, if Michigan doesn't stop them, they have a very good chance. In fact, they might, in my opinion, be the favorite to win it all. That is what's at stake here. A national title is at stake. A college football playoff appearance is at stake. The Big Ten championship game is at stake. And both teams' pride, especially, is at stake in this matchup here. This game will take place at noon Eastern time, as it almost always does, and it will be on Fox. So like last year, you will hear Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt covering this game. Ohio State's given a massive 71.8% chance to win according to ESPN's FPI. That has to do with the fact that Ohio State is viewed as a more efficient team by nearly 8 points, and in Football Power Index, they are 5 points better than Michigan, which is huge. To give you a comparison there, that's comparing Notre Dame to Iowa. Like Notre Dame obviously being the better team than Iowa, that's how much better Ohio State's viewed compared to Michigan, plus home field advantage. That's why Ohio State's favored heavily by the computers. By spread, they're favored by only 7 right now at the time of this recording, which is Sunday. So that number will probably move. It'll probably drift in between, I would say, 6 and 8, maybe 9. It was 7 last week, and seeing that Ohio State had the more impressive performance, and the gap, according to the computers, widened after their performances, that number is more likely going to trend in Ohio State's favor than Michigan's favor, especially as news about Blake Corum's health and Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams' health releases to the public. And don't forget Donovan Edwards as well. But Ohio State, listen, they have the advantage at quarterback, wide receiver, linebacker, and their entire staff. The advantage at quarterback and wide receiver is massive. Didn't think it would be as massive in the preseason. I thought it would still be big, but let me tell you something. J.J. McCarthy has performed under my expectations. And C.J. Stroud has performed about the same, at least from an efficiency standpoint. From a numbers standpoint, purely he has underperformed, but that's because Ryan Day and Kevin Wilson are trying to run the football more, which, given their running back health and given some of their lack of success there, I don't exactly understand it, but I digress. J.J. McCarthy has a 150.3 passer rating, a 75.2 QBR, which is 19th in the country. These numbers, by the way, passer rating is slightly better, but the QBR is pretty similar to Cade McNamara's numbers last year. J.J. McCarthy, better QB than Cade, more efficient. He has 213 rushing yards on the ground and 3 rushing TDs. He can scramble. He's only been sacked 8 times, but he has underperformed. He hasn't passed as much as I thought he would. He's not as accurate. His footwork is just not as advanced. He has potential. You see that in some of his deep throws. Others are completely inaccurate. You see it in his scrambling and some of his decision-making. But he is a very volatile quarterback. The only thing he's not volatile in is turnovers. He has gotten very good at not turning over the ball since earlier this season when he had struggles doing that. And he also had struggles doing that last year. C.J. Stroud, 35 touchdowns, 4 picks, the number 1 QBR in the country, and a 183 passer rating. No doubt about it, quarterback's better. The staff, just looking at how Ryan Day and Jim Knowles, those are the offensive and defensive play callers, how they operate and how Ohio State's defense has transformed itself, I'm no doubt going with Ohio State on staff. Michigan's offensive staff is good. I love Sharon Moore. I like Matt Weiss, but Ohio State's staff, bigger, better, more resources, and it's the same with their overall talent structure. Now, what Michigan has done well is with strength and conditioning and developmental, they've used their 3 stars and 4 stars and transformed them in some positions to play like what you'd expect from Ohio State's 4 stars and 5 stars. You see this at running back with Blake Corum, who is I think a mid-tier 4-star who was offered by Ohio State, chose Michigan, was probably more heavily pursued by Michigan, goes there, and he's been playing better than any of Ohio State's running backs when healthy. Corum, then Mayan Williams, and then Travion Henderson and Donovan Edwards would be pretty close, probably tied for third right there. And then it would go Dallin Hayden and then CJ Stokes if you're to go into the third string. Michigan's running back room, if both running back rooms are healthy, which right now it looks like both are going to suffer some injuries in the game or not play at 100%, Michigan's running back room is better. Blake Corum has 18 rushing touchdowns, nearly 1,500 receiving yards. He has 19 total touchdowns and nearly 1,600 total yards. At wide receiver, you have Brian Hartline as the wide receivers coach. No more needs to be said on that with Marvin Harrison Jr., who is just, he's just a legend. He's going to be a first-round wide receiver. And he's too young to enter in the draft this season. That's just how special he is. At tight end, Luke Schoonmaker and Colston Loveland versus Cade Stover for depth reasons and for, I'd say, overall performance. Like, combining Colston Loveland and Luke Schoonmaker and the fact that Michigan's tight ends get used more overall, I'd pick Michigan with tight ends. Offensive line and defensive line, I'm giving Michigan superior trench play. Honestly, Michigan's offensive line has been better at pass block and run block. On the defensive line, Ohio State does have the higher ceiling there, but Michigan has had the more consistent D-line play all year. At linebacker, Steel Chambers, Tommy Eichenberg. They have had phenomenal seasons. I thought that the linebacker core would be the weakness of Ohio State's defense. That is, in fact, not true. It's one of their main strengths. And then at defensive back, with Mike Sainristil, DJ Turner, RJ Moten, it's very close because, you have Tanner McAllister and Ronnie Hickman who play safety, and they're pretty good. They're very solid players, but Denzel Burke and Cameron Brown, the corner position has been weak for Ohio State all year, and given that Steve Clinkscale is Michigan's secondary coach, I got to give some coaching bonus points there, and I think Michigan at defensive back is better. And with Brad Robbins and Jake Moody, they perform well, very well. They're one of the best special teams units in the country, with an All-American kicker and a punter that some considered to be possibly an All-American there. Michigan is number 4 in efficiency, and they're number 4 in FPI. For Ohio State, they're number 2 in FPI and second in efficiency. Both of these are unanimous top 4 teams. When you look at metrics and power rankings, they're unanimous top 3 when you look at opinion, the eye test, and overall on-field play. I have no understanding why a 2-loss Alabama team would be favored over every team but Ohio State and Georgia. I get that they're Alabama, but this team didn't even score 40 points against Austin Peay. They struggled against a Texas A&M team that struggled against UMass. They lost to LSU, who looks to be more and more like a paper tiger when you look at efficiency metrics and FPI. And you might say, well, that stuff's garbage because you look at Texas and Alabama being ranked high, but believe me, those efficiency rankings matter. There's some areas where they mess up, and that's okay because they're still overall accurate. Those metrics and LSU's close wins, inefficiencies, and ineptitude in some areas, it's going to catch up to them when they face Georgia, because Georgia doesn't play around. Georgia just murders you. That's what Georgia does. Both these teams are top 15 in talent, as we all know. The Wolverines' main strength is their number 1 rushing attack. The Buckeyes' main strength is their number 1 passing attack. Now, Michigan's running attack didn't look like it was number 1 this past Saturday, but Blake Corum's injury and Donovan Edwards being out for the entire game makes a huge difference. Even then, against a defense that's top 15, top 10 nationally, and their defense being healthy, and Michigan's having some injuries in running back, CJ Stokes was still able to break through for some sizable runs. So Michigan's running attack, when healthy, is no doubt number 1 in the country. And it's facing off against a Buckeye passing attack, which even with the injury of Marvin Harrison Jr., not of Marvin Harrison Jr., of Jackson Smith and Jigba, even with that injury, they're the number 1 passing attack in the country, in my opinion. Total stats and yards may not support that, but Ohio State scores 46.5 points per game. They pass it for nearly 300 yards per game. And listen, Marvin Harrison Jr. crossed the 1,000-yard mark. He's 11 receiving touchdowns, 1,037 receiving yards, and he averages 16 yards per reception. And Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming, Xavier Johnson. I mean, Egbuka has 8 receiving touchdowns. Fleming has 6, both of over 400 receiving yards. They have crazy good wide receivers. They have an NFL QB who might be the first overall pick, which is projected to go to the Houston Texans. Speaking of him and Corum are my players to watch. It isn't a given that Corum is going to appear in the game, but I'm pretty sure Michigan and Blake Corum are going to do everything in their power, even if he isn't 100% to get him in the game. And from what Jim Harbaugh briefly said to reporters, which of course is the most Jim Harbaugh thing to do, it doesn't look like Corum's injury is serious at all, but his knee was bothering him, or uncomfortable, quote unquote. I'm paraphrasing there. So they kept him out against Illinois, which to me, I mean, you want to be 11-0 heading into Ohio State, so you want to play him if you can, but they kept him out. And I trust the coach's decision more than I trust my own, because they know their roster much better than I know the roster, because they coach them and they develop them. It's kind of a no-brainer. But Blake Corum and CJ Stroud, those are the players to watch. I do not believe, because of Michigan's red zone issues, I do not believe that Ohio State needs to be the better running attack. They just need to be more efficient, and they themselves can't have red zone issues like they did last year against Michigan. They can't have that. If their offensive line plays well, they can allow Michigan to rush for more yards, and they can still be a dominant force, and they can win the game. CJ Stroud has passed for 2,991 yards, averages 9.7 yards per pass, 35 passing touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He has a 183.3 passer rating, and he also has 77 rushing yards on the ground. Blake Corum has 1,457 rushing yards, averaging 5.9 yards per carry, and he has 18 rushing touchdowns with a long of 61. He also has 1 receiving touchdown and 80 receiving yards. So both of these guys who, if one of them has a big game and their team wins, they are immediately, most likely guaranteed, a trip to New York. If Blake Corum has over 200 yards and several touchdowns, or if CJ Stroud has over 300 yards and 2 or 3 passing touchdowns, they're guaranteed a trip to New York. With whoever wins, as long as they have a good, not even elite performance, as long as they have a good performance and their team wins, I think that one of these guys is guaranteed a trip to New York. Possibly both go to New York if Michigan wins, because CJ Stroud is already very high on the list and is projected by many to win the Heisman Trophy already. This gets me to my prediction, which as a Michigan fan, I don't like it, but I have to call it what it is. Ohio State 31, Michigan 27. And I was leaning on choosing Michigan, partially, before this past Saturday. 10-0, 10-0, and Ohio State's run defense, that was the main thing. Their run defense is and was more evidently before Michigan's game against Illinois is worse than Michigan's, and I think it still is. But the problem is it's in Columbus. Michigan, matchup-wise, I think is actually very favorable against Ohio State. But it's in Columbus. The way Michigan played Illinois, they looked sloppy, and it really wasn't the sloppiness of play that impacts my decision-making here. Part of it's the injury, factoring in that Blake Corum might not be 100%. Most importantly, it's that this game is in Columbus. Ohio State has a consistent top 15 defense all year. Their passing game has not flinched one bit compared to last year, even with JSN's injury. It just hasn't. Michigan still has all their goals in front of them, and even if they lose this game and fall to 11-1, they still might be in the college football playoff. They still might have a chance to win the national title, which they would be 13-1 if they lose this game, go into the playoff, and win the national title. They would be like 2017 Alabama. They're second in their division, and they still make it in despite not even appearing in their conference title game and win it all, which would be awesome to a certain, extent. Like, if Michigan can't win this game but can win the national title, I will be happy as a Wolverine fan. But I would still like to win this game. And Michigan losing this game, they're not like Ohio State. Ohio State is probably a playoff lock regardless because they're ranked higher right now. They've looked more impressive all year. And even though their loss would be worse than if Michigan lost, because a home loss is worse than a road loss, they have beaten Notre Dame. They have the better strength of schedule, and they have the bigger football brand. They do. Ohio State has had much more success in the 21st century compared to Michigan, and with CJ Stroud and their flashy offense, they're more likely to be in the playoffs than Michigan is. If both of these teams want to maximize their shot to both match up again in the college football playoff, Michigan would have to win, because Michigan being ranked lower, Michigan needs this game to win a national title more than Ohio State does. And that's just my opinion. It could be wrong, but looking at the college football playoff rankings, metrics, and just knowing what the media and what the populace likes, which is Ohio State's style of football, that's just my opinion. I think both of the star players to look out for will have good games. I think Corum will have around 150 yards, probably more than less. If he goes too much over or under that, it's more likely that he'll go over that. And I think he will have 2 or more total touchdowns. Probably both of them or all of them would be rushing. And quarterback CJ Stroud for Ohio State, he'll have 300 passing yards, which, by the way, he did last year. He had 300 passing yards last year, and he will have 2 or more passing touchdowns. Red zone issues will cause Michigan this game. That's my opinion. I have Ohio State winning by 4 because when Michigan kicks a field goal, one of the times Ohio State will, instead of responding with a field goal, they'll respond with a touchdown. And that will win them the game, because Ohio State has a better red zone offense. They're the more efficient team, both on offense and defense, according to ESPN's FPI. The only area where Michigan is more efficient in is special teams. Superior offensive play, along with home field advantage and the better staff, will win this matchup. And I will give the Buckeyes all of those things. Very close game. I think it will be entertaining. I can't wait to watch it. I will be glued to the TV screen the entire time this game rolls. Thank you all for watching. If you're new to the channel, or if you've been watching for a while but just haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please do. Thank you all for watching. If you're listening via Spotify, please follow the channel and comment your score prediction for this game down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you all later. Bye.